Undercover Episode 11, written by Julia Derrick. I was having a late lunch at Le Bon Soup the following day to check out the place where Ian and Ariel had eaten. The sooner I could figure out why Ariel had been found strangled and dumped in Midtown when, according to Ian, she had taken a cab to the Upper West Side, the better. I would start by visiting the restaurant and talking to the staff there. If I tipped my waitress profusely, she'd hopefully point me in the right direction. The brunette girl with the big nose and lips came up to my table as I was enjoying a very tasty creme brulee. "How is everything?" she asked and smiled warmly. "Can I get you something else?" "No, I'm good. Thanks so much," I replied and returned her smile. "May I have the check?" "Certainly," she said and left the table. As I finished my dessert, I took in my surroundings once more. There were few people in the small, cozy eatery, which I was grateful for, as it would make my prying easier. My eyes found one of the intriguing paintings on the walls, and I was in the midst of admiring the passion the artist was evoking by mixing such bold colors with each other when my waitress returned with a checkbook. I handed her my credit card that I had already removed from my wallet. A couple of minutes later, I was signing the card slip. "And this is for you," I said, and handed her $40 in cash, the same amount as my bill. She broke into a big grin. "Thanks so much, miss. That's so generous of you." "It's my pleasure." I cleared my throat and said in a low voice, "May I ask you a couple of questions?" She quickly caught on and leaned closer to me, mimicking my voice. "What do you want to know?" I tossed a couple of quick glances around me to be sure no one was looking like they were eavesdropping on us. The other patrons all appeared either deep in conversation or sat too far away to be able to hear anything. "A girlfriend of mine was here having dinner with a date last Thursday night. Did you work that night?" The girl looked pensive for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I did." "I assume you're aware that a woman who dined here that night was found strangled a few blocks away from this restaurant?" The cooperative expression on the waitress's face morphed into one of horror, and her hands flew up to cover her mouth. "I am aware of that." "Cops were here a couple of hours ago to ask who she was having dinner with that night?" "That was your friend?" "My God, that's so sad." I made myself look miserable. "Yes, it is very, very sad." Blinking a couple of times, I reached for a paper napkin and dabbed at my eyes. She was such a nice girl. "Did the cops ask you about her?" "Yes, but there wasn't much I could say since I didn't serve her. I just remembered seeing her and her date that night." "What did the cops want to know, if you don't mind me asking? Do they think her date might be the killer?" The waitress shrugged her skinny shoulders. "I'm not sure, but they did ask us a lot of questions about him. I couldn't really answer any since I never spoke to the couple, just saw them. My manager gave them the number to the waiter who attended to them. He's not here today." "Oh. Do you remember if they looked like they were having a good time?" The waitress inhaled deeply and looked like she thought hard. She sighed. "The cops asked me that too, and I told them that I couldn't really tell. They were talking a lot and leaning closely together. You know the way people do when they're discussing something really serious? Do you know the guy she was with?" "Yeah, he's a friend of mine too. Not as close as Ariel, though. That's her name." "But yes, I do know him." I blinked again to force a couple of tears to my eyes, and then dabbed at them with the napkin. This clearly provoked the wrong idea, because the waitress suddenly leaned closer, eyes round with dismay. "Oh no, you think he might have killed her?" I smiled and shook my head. "No, definitely not. He doesn't have a mean bone in his body." "So the cops only wanted to know about her date then? Nothing besides him?" "Well, they did ask me and the other staff if we remembered anything else strange happening that night, if she had some kind of altercation with someone. None of us saw anything like that." I nodded. Do you know if she forgot something here? Did she come back to pick something up after she and her date had left? I hoped the detectives assigned to this case hadn't asked these questions. I couldn't see why they would, since they didn't know that Ariel had ostensibly taken a cab up to her neighborhood with Ian right after the date was over. Well, except for the fact that the murder took place about 45 minutes after Ian said they left the restaurant. They must wonder why it took the killer so long to attack when the body was found only blocks from Le Bon Soup. The waitress screwed up her features and gazed beyond me, looking deep in thought once more. I exhaled quietly with relief they probably hadn't asked then. Her eyes found me. I honestly can't remember. I was so busy that night. We were all very busy. She brightened. But our hostess might remember. She would be the person your friend spoke to if she forgot something. She hasn't been in since Thursday, so the cops never spoke to her. She's coming in for the night shift. I can call her and ask if you want. I smiled wide. That would be so great. I think I'll have a cappuccino, actually. I handed her a $20 bill. You can keep the change. She took it from me. Thanks. Okay. I'll call her while the barista makes your drink. I'll be right back. The girl hurried through a swing door that I assumed led into the restaurant's kitchen. I was keeping my fingers crossed that the waitress would not only call the hostess, but that the hostess would pick up the phone. By the time the waitress returned with my cappuccino, I had begun biting my nails, something I never did. I was so desperate to find out if Ariel had come back to the restaurant. A little flushed, the waitress placed the steaming drink in front of me. I spoke to her, she said. Oh, great. What did she say? That someone called the restaurant to find out if they had misplaced a purple scarf. One of the busboys found a scarf like that and gave it to her. To the hostess. Yup, and Gina, that's the hostess, told the woman on the phone that we had it, but she never showed up to get it. I nodded slowly. I could see Ariel wearing some kind of purple scarf she loved, bright, bold colors. Can I see the scarf? Sure, it's in the hostess stand. The waitress turned to leave, but I grabbed her by the arm. She looked at me. Did you ask Gina what time the woman called to ask for the scarf? No, the waitress replied, but I told her you were a friend of the woman who was found strangled, and that you wondered if she might have forgotten something in the restaurant. So I think she got that it was later in the evening. But I can text her to double check. Do you want me to? Yes, please do. Okay, she said, and I let go of her. She was soon back with a purple silk scarf in her hands that she extended me. This is it. Does it look familiar? I made myself brighten with delight. Yes, that looks just like one of Ariel's scarves. She's a total scarf person. Bringing the scarf to my cheek, I looked up at the waitress. Can I keep it? It would mean a lot to me. I blinked and wiped at my eyes again. She shrugged in that non-committal way of hers. I can't see why not. She glanced down at the white apron tied around her hips. I think someone just texted me. Hold on. Her hand disappeared into the apron's big pocket, and she fished up a cell phone that she looked at. She raised her gaze back to mine. She thinks the call was sometime around 11, maybe a little later. Thank you. That must have been Ariel then. I had a few big sips of my cappuccino, then got to my feet. I really appreciate you telling me all this and giving me this scarf. No problem. Are you going to tell the police about her wanting to pick up the scarf? That might be important information. I nodded gravely. Oh, definitely. They need to know every detail of what Ariel did right before her. I made myself as teary-eyed as I could muster her death. If you'll excuse me, I'm going to have to leave now. I just wanted to see for myself what it was like at the place where my dear friend had her last meal. And now I know, and I got this scarf. Thanks so much again. I wiped at my eyes with my fingertips. Have a great day. I swiveled around and strode out of the little restaurant before the waitress had second thoughts about all my questions. Ian is probably telling the truth then, I thought as I walked along the busy street outside the French eatery. Ariel must have realized she forgot the scarf almost as soon as she stepped out of the cab, and then she must have taken another back to Midtown. But she obviously never got inside the restaurant after leaving the second cab. Did someone assault her right outside the restaurant? Considering how crowded the area was where the restaurant was located, it seemed unlikely chances where someone would have seen it happen. With all the street lamps and lit signs, it wasn't exactly dark on the sidewalk, and Thursday was a popular night in this part of town. Maybe she left the cab a few blocks away because she wanted to walk over? She could have been low on cash, only able to afford the fare up to a certain point. Perhaps the cab driver assaulted her. Did someone on the street lure her away before she could enter the restaurant? Janine Eastwood. But how would Janine know that Ariel would come back to Le Bon Soup? I shook my head. So many possibilities, so many questions. Just to be sure the scarf was in fact Ariel's, I'd ask Ian, when I saw him again, if she had worn one at some point during their date. I had just finished training Ian, and he had confirmed that the purple scarf looked exactly like the scarf Ariel had worn that fatal night. It had to be hers. Now that he was fully recovered from his food poisoning, he kept ranting about the conspiracy throughout the entire session, and how we needed to figure out who else might be spying on us. There had to be several amongst all the employees at the Club Adler, and their cohorts ran too big an operation to use only one spy. Plus, he'd claimed Ariel herself had said she thought there were more, but she wasn't aware of who they could be. She suspected that Rolf, the fitness manager, was in on it, but that was it. The one person who'd surely know was Janine Eastwood, Ian had said. I agreed the North Carolina senator was a shady character, though not in the same way as Ian did. I was convinced she had something to do with Ariel's murder, but that was it. Which was why I was now going to see if I could turn her into my client using a similar method to the one I'd used to turn Philippe Cardoza into my client a few years ago. It had worked brilliantly. For it to succeed, I needed to act quickly. I walked over to the employee computers behind the fitness desk and pulled up the database with all the members. Very soon I had the senator's contact info in my phone. Taking a quick look into the adjacent basketball court, I moved over there to make my illicit phone call. I needed to be in an area where I could be sure no one would suddenly interrupt me, and the basketball court was perfect for that purpose. Using a code to block my number from showing up, I called the senator. As I listened to the rings going through, I prayed the senator would pick up. I wasn't about to leave a voicemail. She finally did. May I speak to Miss Janine Eastwood? I asked in my most pleasant voice, to which I had also added a southern twang. It was crucial that she didn't recognize my voice when we spoke in person. This is she, the senator replied. Hello, my name is Linda, and I'm an administrative assistant at Nikki Sports Club. How are you today? I'm good, thank you. What's this regarding? I'm in a bit of a time crunch. Okay, I understand. I'm calling to inform you that unfortunately your trainer Ariel Raffaeli is no longer with us. She was assaulted and passed last week. I paused and pricked up my ears. Oh no, she's dead? That's terrible. Oh my God, so terrible. As I had expected, her outburst sounded completely phony. So phony I would have picked up on it even if I had been half asleep and drunk. This woman just had to be involved in Ariel's passing somehow. I know, I said. We are all so upset here at the club. It's so sad. She was a very valued employee. When is her funeral? I would like to go there to honor her memory. She was a wonderful trainer in person. That's a lot of emotion to express for someone you had known only a few weeks, and whose arm you grabbed and shaken hard. I couldn't help but note. This woman was so full of it. Of course, I said calmly. We'll send you an email with all the information. Does the club have your email? She gave me her email and I verified in my phone that it was the same one we had. Not that she'd ever receive any funeral information, but I doubted she actually cared. Are you looking to continue your training? I asked when we had finished going over her email. I see here in the system that you have 9 sessions remaining. May I book you with one of our excellent trainers for a time this week? I see your next appointment with Ariel is scheduled for tomorrow at 3 p.m. Would you like to keep that appointment, but with another trainer? I held my breath as I waited for her to give me her answer. Yes, sure. I exhaled, relaxing a little. Halfway there? Okay, great. I have an amazing trainer named Jamie Richards, who is very similar in style. She could train you. Would that work? Yes, fine. That sounds good. I'm revising your appointment in the system right now. You'll get an email with all the information, including Jamie's contact information, so you can communicate with her directly from now on. Do you know where to meet your new trainer? I assume by the fitness desk. Yes, that's exactly right. Well, you have a great day now, Miss Eastwood. Likewise. Goodbye. I closed my eyes and pressed the smartphone to my chest. Thank God. That went almost too easily. It would be just my luck that the senator contacted me to cancel the session now that I was about to talk to her and get a feeling for what kind of a person she was. I opened my eyes and smiled. No point in thinking negatively. If the senator happened to cancel her session, we could always reschedule. I'd get to speak to her one way or another. And if Rolf wondered how come I was suddenly training Janine Eastwood, I'd just claim the senator had approached me on the floor and asked me to train her. It was a common enough occurrence at the club. With those reassuring thoughts in mind, I walked out of the basketball court and over to the women's restroom at the other end of the fitness desk. One of the maintenance guys was standing outside with a cart full of cleaning supplies. His name was Paco, a 6-foot-tall man from Nicaragua, somewhere in his 40s with a V-shaped unibrow that made him appear eternally angry. But he wasn't. Instead, he was one of the happiest, friendliest people I had ever met. Too bad his English was no way near as good as his Spanish. I was dying to speak to him in Spanish, ask him how life was in Nicaragua, a country that had always fascinated me. Unfortunately, Jamie Richards wasn't from Colombia, but from the Midwest, so that could never happen. Hey, Paco, I said and smiled. You waiting for people to exit the bathroom? Yes. Many lady inside. He grinned at me, displaying crooked, yellow teeth. The maintenance staff weren't allowed to enter to restock and clean while members were using the restrooms. Some of the members could be quite militant about this rule, making me feel bad for the hard-working, underpaid cleaners. Out of solidarity, I decided to wait with Paco until whoever was inside the small restroom had left. I didn't mind if he was there while I did my business. How's life treating you? I asked him. Good. He looked at me with uncomprehending eyes, that benevolent grin still on his face. I patted him on the shoulder. Como te trata la vida? I repeated the question in Spanish, unable to help myself. Besides, a girl from the Midwest could have picked up a few words of Spanish while on spring break in Mexico, right? Oh, estoy bien, bien, gracias, he replied, continuing in Spanish. And how are you? So you speak Spanish then? As much as I wanted to keep the conversation going, connect a little with this nice man, I knew that I couldn't take the risk. So I just smiled and said, K. The stately, dark-haired woman was standing by the fitness desk when I arrived, reading something on an iPad. I walked up to her. Excuse me, I began. Are you Janine Eastwood? She glanced up from the iPad. Yes, I am. I extended my hand and smiled. I'm Jamie Richards. Nice to meet you. She shook it and returned my smile. It was the first time I'd seen her smile in person, and it was even more pleasant than the couple of times I'd seen her talking on TV, where she smiled a lot. She had tied back her thick, shoulder-length hair in a low ponytail, and her olive skin was smooth like a young woman's. The brown eyes were set wide apart, her lips on the thin side and the narrow nose elegant. Overall, she had an appealing face and aura about her. We walked down to the third floor where we would work out, doing small talk about how horrible it was that Ariel had been strangled. The senator seemed a lot more genuinely upset about the incident in person, making it hard to believe that she had shaken Ariel like a rag doll, not to mention potentially murdered her. I stole a glance of the woman's hands and noted that, while nicely manicured with red-painted nails, they were strong, almost manly. I could easily see them strangle Ariel with the cord the medical examiner had stated had been used in the police report. When I trained her, I would give her hands a closer examination, look for chafing and marks that might have resulted from a fight. As far as I could tell, there were no bruises or marks on her wrists and lower arms, suggesting that Ariel had tried to defend herself, scratched and grabbed at the hands and arms of the person assaulting her. According to forensics and the police report, the person had attacked from behind. So far, the only suspect the police had was Ian, whom they had taken in for questioning a couple of days ago. Except for the fact that he was the last person who'd been with her, there had been nothing to tie him to the murder, so they had to let him go. We reached the third floor. "How about we do a light jog out on the track to warm up?" I suggested and indicated the track that was visible through the big windows. "It's so nice out." "Sounds like a great idea," she replied. So we went out there. Other trainers were out there, working out with clients. I spotted Jonah and gave him a brief nod. I had to be careful not to be too friendly with him, as he kept coming on to me. It seemed he thought I would eventually go out with him, if he only tried hard enough. Janine and I started running slowly around the track. When we had completed 2 laps, we went back inside and went over to a row machine. "Did you and Ariel start to train last month?" I asked her as she finished the first set of rows. "Yes, we only trained together a few times," she replied. "I really enjoyed working with her." She sighed and shook her head. "I can't believe she's dead. I really hope they find out who did that to her. It's such a senseless act." "I know. It's terrible." I pointed to a nearby cable machine. "Let's go over there and do a set of chest presses." We walked over to the chest press machine. "Do you think it could have been a jealous boyfriend?" Janine asked as she got in position. "I read about the incident in the newspaper, and the authorities seem to believe it was a crime of passion." "I really don't know," I replied. "But I don't think so. She didn't have a boyfriend, as far as I know. That's why I introduced her to my client. She told me she thought he was hot, and I thought he might feel the same way about her." "And did he?" Janine looked at me so sharply suddenly that, for the first time, I could believe she was capable of killing another person. "Sure, she was a very attractive woman. Most guys would like her." Janine began doing the chest presses using the cables. "Do you think he might have strangled her?" "No. The cops took him in for questioning since he was the last person she was seen with. But they had to let him go. Except for him having no alibi for after they left the restaurant together, there's absolutely nothing to suggest he had a reason to kill her. Apparently, the people at the restaurant corroborated his claim that they'd had a very nice dinner together." The senator finished her set of chest presses, and we went back to the seated row machine. "Does she have any enemies?" Janine asked as she took a seat on the machine. "I'm not sure," I replied and adjusted the weight stack that someone had changed. I didn't know her very well, to be honest. The senator looked at me and gave me a small, enigmatic smile. "I'm sure it'll turn out someone she rubbed the wrong way killed her. That's usually the way it goes in life." I was still thinking about the weird smile the senator had given me long after we were done with the session. At the time, it had sent a chill through my spine. It had been so devoid of any warmth, so very different from the general aura of conviviality the woman had radiated. She simply must have something to do with Ariel's death. I believed this so strongly I had decided to give the NYPD an anonymous tip. Using one of the phones at Nikkei, I called the Crime Stoppers hotline and left a short message, telling them to check Senator Janine Eastwood for the murder of Ariel Raffaeli. Surely, by the time we had our next session, Janine would have lots of fascinating information to tell me about the NYPD. If my gut was correct, maybe I wouldn't even have to train her again, as she would have been arrested. However, until this actually happened, I should look for other potential suspects. The indifference to Ariel's death among the staff was truly astounding, not to mention sad. There had been more upset faces among them when one of the trainers, a cocky young male from Puerto Rico, had been found beaten to death with dumbbells after rubbing Felipe Cardoza the wrong way. That trainer hadn't been particularly popular either. I would begin by asking around among the trainers at the club. Several of them knew Ariel better than me, at least the current version of Ariel. Being on a floor shift was the ideal time to talk to people. Spotting a couple of the trainers, two gorgeous, skinny blondes, working out together on the 5th floor, I walked up to them. One of them, Christy, turned toward me, in the middle of doing lunges. "Hey, Jamie, how's it going?" she asked, giving me one of her trademark high-wattage smiles. "I'm good," I said, and returned her smile. "You guys are working out hard?" "Not as hard as you," the other blonde Nikki said. She was stepping up and down a bench, her doll pretty face flushed while her high ponytail bounced with each step. "Hey, yeah. That might be true," I replied and grinned mischievously. "I'm kind of a masochist." Christy giggled. "Ah, that explains it. It's terrible what happened to Ariel, isn't it?" I asked, arranging my face into a more serious expression. "I can't believe why anyone would ever want to do such a thing to her." Christy gazed at me calmly, no longer smiling either. "I can." "Me too," Nikki said, and picked up a pair of dumbbells from a weight rack nearby. I know it sounds terrible, but she was not a very nice person. I'm sure she had quite a few enemies. I made myself look surprised. "Really? I thought she was kinda nice." "Yeah, I saw that the two of you worked out together one day," Christy said. She rolled her strikingly blue eyes in a cynical manner. "She must have wanted something from you." "I don't think so," I said. "I know she came off as cold and was pretty unfriendly, but when you got to know her, she was actually quite sweet." "Really?" Nikki said, looking incredulous. "That's hard to believe." "Then again, she never tried to become friends with anyone. She always kept to herself. But the few times I did interact with her, she was never very nice. She couldn't even make herself say hi when we rode the elevator together." She huffed with disgust. "She was probably just in her own world," I said. "I mean, if she was not a nice person, how could she have so many clients?" Nikki shrugged shapely shoulders. "Not sure. I think she was nice to them since they paid her. Plus, she was a very good trainer. That counts for a lot." "It sure does," I replied. "Do you know if she had any enemies here? Maybe we can help the police catch her killer." That would be the right thing to do, even if she wasn't the nicest person in the world, right? "Other than being unpleasant, I can't think of anyone who was her actual enemy," Christy said. "Not me either," Nikki said. "That's what I told the cops who were here yesterday asking about it." "They were here yesterday?" I asked. "Must have been when I was outside during my break. I didn't see any cops." I looked at Christy. "Did you speak to the cops too?" "No, I was training someone. I think they only spoke to some of the trainers and members. And management." "They weren't here that long," Nikki said. "Maybe she pissed off one of her clients. I could see her doing something like that." Christy nodded emphatically. "Yeah, me too." "Did you tell the cops that I asked Nikki?" "No, because I only thought of it just now." She looked uncertain. "Should I call them and tell them?" "I don't know," I said. Maybe. I'm sure they already have a list of all her clients, Christy inserted. I had to agree with her. If I were the detective assigned Ariel's case, I would definitely check with all her clients to find out if there had been any tension there. But who knew with the NYPD? So far, I wasn't very impressed with what I had seen in the police reports. Nikki shrugged. I guess so. I never saw her having any arguments with her clients. I lied, as I had seen her have at least one with Janine, but I wanted to see what Christy and Nikki had to say about it. I don't think so either, Christy began. But before she could continue, her eyes widened. No, wait, she did. She had a fight with a male client just when I was hired at the club, and he got kicked out. That must have been before my time, Nikki said. I looked at Christy. What exactly happened? She accused him of stalking her, she explained. And I think she had proof that he actually did. She nodded to herself. Yes, she did. He seemed pretty psycho. He came up to her and yelled nasty things when she was training someone and had to be escorted out of the club. It was crazy. How long ago was that, I asked. Maybe a year ago? I can totally see him wanting to kill her, as furious as he was. She never mentioned him doing something else to her after he was kicked out, I asked her. Christy smiled. I have absolutely no idea. Remember, it wasn't like she ever talked much to anyone. If anyone would know about it, it would be Rolf. Right? I exhaled a long breath. Well, I got to know her a little bit. I feel so bad for her. No one deserves to be killed like that. That's true, Nikki said. It seemed at least she was done with this conversation and wanted to get on with her workout. I should get going, I said. Weights are waiting to be re-racked and towels to be picked up and thrown into the laundry basket, I added with sarcasm. See you girls later? I waved and walked down to the 4th floor. On my way, I did pick up a few dirty towels people had just left on machines or dumped directly on the floor. But instead of walking toward the cardio area where there was always plenty of members I could chit-chat with, I headed toward Rolf's office. I wanted to see what he had to say about Ariel's murder. Before entering, I peeked through the glass door to his office to see if he was in there alone. He was, so I entered. He looked up from the computer screen and gave me a hurried smile. Hello, Jamie. What can I do for you? I just wanted to come by and say how sorry I am for what happened to Ariel. It's terrible. I so hope they'll catch the person who did it. I heard on the news that they have yet to arrest someone. I'm so relieved my client was cleared, or I would have felt so guilty. Rolf's bold brown eyes gleamed with an emotion I couldn't determine. That was your client she went out with? Yeah. I introduced them since Ariel thought he was really hot. The feeling was mutual, so he asked her out. Rolf nodded. I see. I exhaled. Yeah, thank God they let him go. Do you think that guy she had thrown out from the club last year did it? The one who stalked her? My manager looked confused. Who? I told him what Christy had said about Ariel's stalker and how he had yelled at her at the club while she was training someone. Rolf lit up in acknowledgement. Ah, yes, I remember now. You must refer to Charles Hutchkins. I completely forgot about him. I suppose it's possible. I believe he did stalk her for some time after he was thrown out. He grabbed a pen and jotted down something on a notepad on his desk. I'll have to tell the cops about old Charles. I only gave them her current client list. That's good. I know she wasn't all that popular among the other trainers, but I liked her. I got a chance to get to know her a little. I think she was just misunderstood. Will you guys find out where the funeral will be held, and when? Yes, as soon as we find out, we'll send out an email. Look for it in the next few days. I will. Well, I'm gonna let you keep working. Sorry for interrupting, but I was just so upset when I heard about Ariel. He gave me a warm smile. No worries, Jamie. I was too. She will be missed." I gave him a nod and left his office, glad it had been so easy to find out the name of Ariel's stalker. As I waited for the NYPD to investigate Janine, I would keep myself busy by investigating Charles Hutchkins. Charles Hutchkins was a 45-year-old bachelor with a strong predilection for strip clubs. That was the most salient piece of information George learned after he did the quick search on Ariel's former client I'd asked him to do for me. I had called George as soon as I left Rolf's office, hoping to beat the NYPD's detectives to the punch. After setting Ariel up with Ian, I felt personally responsible to catch her killer. If Janine Eastwood wasn't behind her death, it sure looked like a jealous rage might have caused it. I could totally see an obsessed stalker like Hutchkins reasoning that, if he couldn't have Ariel, no one else would, either. Considering that my manager had forgotten to tell the detectives about Hutchkins, I should make it. George had been able to hack Hutchkins's credit card bills that had dozens of charges to two of Manhattan's biggest titty bars. "Does it look like he favors one over the other?" I asked George. He had just called me to inform me about his findings. "Let's see," George replied, and I could hear him count quietly. "According to last month's statement, it looks like Flash Dancers has a slight edge over Sapphire. There are 5 more charges made to Flash Dancers. They're all around $15-20. So I'm thinking they're for drinks. A couple are 40 and 50. He might have run a tab those nights instead of paying drinks individually." Any charges made the night of the murder? I gave him the exact date. "I'm checking. Yes, there are a couple, but those might have been made the night before. Sometimes it takes a while for a charge to go through." "Good point. How often are the charges at these strip clubs made?" Again, George got quiet. Then, about 3 or 4 times a week split between the 2 clubs. "Great, thanks. I think I'll be visiting these clubs tonight and see if I can get an opportunity to speak to this man." After ending my call with George, I finished my floor shift and then headed to Ricky's, a cosmetics and beauty supply store, to buy a new wig, one with long, honey blonde hair similar to Ariel's hair and fake eyelashes, as well as some bright red lipstick. Then I bought a pair of black fishnet stockings that I would wear with my black leather stiletto boots and a short, skin-tight black dress. Since I was going to compete with almost naked women, I figured that the sluttier I could make myself look, the better the chance Hutchkins paid me attention. My only advantage was that I didn't require for him to keep sticking dollar bills into my panties to engage with him. A drink would do. When I left my apartment that night, I wore a pair of oversized sunglasses. Even though I didn't think that anyone would recognize me with all the makeup and the new wig, I wanted to keep as low a profile as possible. I hailed a cab and was on my way to Flash Dancers. Soft music, with a seductive beat, reached my ears as soon as I was inside the dark club. The woman who sat in a ticket booth built into the wall just smiled at me and motioned for me to keep going. As I made an attempt to pay the cover charge, I walked down a long set of stairs. The farther into the club I got, the louder the music got, and soon I was in a big space with 3 long catwalks on which girls wearing only G-strings strutted their stuff. Men of varying ages sat or stood around these stages, gazing up at the girls that were lit in several directions by spotlights in different colors. There were also some women among the adoring audience members. I had memorized the 2 images George had found for me of Hutchkins and was now scanning the semi-dark area for the man. Hopefully, he was sitting here somewhere, feeding dollar bills to some gyrating girl. My plan was to pretend I was a bisexual woman who was as horny as Hutchkins seemed to be. I had given up on spotting him somewhere and was heading toward the exit when I finally saw a man descending the stairs who looked just like the image in my head. I hid behind a column as I watched Hutchkins continue into the club and take a seat at a table near the first catwalk. A waitress was quickly by his side, taking an order. I pondered the best approach. Should I be bold and ask him if I could join him, or simply take a seat at a neighboring table? There was an open one right next to him. Based on all the appreciative looks and whistles I'd gotten since I'd arrived, I opted to be bold. Adjusting my dress, I sauntered over to his small table. "Is this seat taken?" I asked, using my most seductive voice. He turned to face me, his eyes going from my boobs up to my face, and then back to my boobs where they stayed for several seconds. Wearing a cheap-looking suit, he had wispy, dark hair and an unattractive face with a significant turkey neck. "No, please have a seat," he said, his buggy, pale eyes glued to my chest. I pulled out the chair and took a seat. I smiled at Hutchkins, whose gaze had finally moved back to my face. He grinned back at me, revealing a jarring gold tooth. "Would you like a drink?" he asked. "Sure. A Cosmo would be nice," I replied. He looked around, and when he spotted a scantily dressed waitress, he waved her over. The willowy girl was soon at his side. He jabbed a thumb in my direction and said something into the girl's ear. She nodded and disappeared. I smiled at him. The girls here are so hot. Can't get enough of them. As expected, his eyes lit up with excitement. "You like girls?" As much as I like men, I winked at him, and he was practically drooling. A brunette girl danced in front of us, shaking her shapely butt in our faces. To underscore just how much I liked girls, I stuck a $10 bill into the stripper's tiny silver panties as she squatted in front of us. She kept gyrating her hips for a while in appreciation and then moved on. I turned to look at an open-mouthed Hutchkins, whose eyes were big like ping-pong balls. By now he was so excited. He licked his lips and grinned at me. "You like to do them at the same time?" he asked. "Yes, but tonight I'd like a man only. You know someone who's available?" He almost choked on his drink. Coughing, he wiped his mouth with a cocktail napkin, then cleared his throat. "Sure, I am. When do you want to leave?" "Now." "Let's enjoy a drink first and talk a little, watch the girls. That turns me on more." The waitress returned with my Cosmo then. Hutchkins handed her a 20 and slapped her on the butt as she left, telling her to keep the change. Then his attention was back on me again. "What would you like to talk about?" "How often do you come here?" I asked him. "A few times a week." "You?" I licked my own lips and picked up my drink, holding his gaze all the while. "This is my first time. It's something so incredibly erotic with beautiful dancing girls." "Yes, it is. Can't get enough of them. What else turns you on?" I giggled. "Oh, lots of things. I'll show you later." "What did you do last Thursday? Were you here?" Having another sip of his drink, he looked like he was considering my question. "No, I was in Philly that night. My mother needed me to take her to the hospital that evening, so I spent the night at her place." "That's so sweet of you. You're a good son." "I try to be. I'm the only one she has." "Ah, an only child. I'm one too." "We have so much in common." His gleaming eyes went to my chest as I had a sip of my starkly pink drink. "Yes, it sure sounds like it. What was wrong with your mother?" "She twisted her ankle badly and couldn't walk, so I had to take her to the emergency room for x-rays to see if she had broken something." "Oh, wow. That must have taken the entire night." "Yeah, we didn't get in until 1 in the morning." "Was anything broken?" "No, fortunately it was only a bad sprain. They put her in an ankle brace and gave her a pair of crutches. She's not supposed to put any weight on it for a couple weeks." "That's so good. I mean that it wasn't anything more serious. What hospital was it?" "Pennsylvania Hospital." "Why? You planning on going there?" He looked at me in a funny way. Something wild had ignited in his eyes, and I didn't like it. I had seen that look in criminally inclined people before, and it was a bad sign. I needed to get out of there. I'd gotten what I'd come for. If his story panned out, he couldn't be Ariel's killer. Though, given his touchiness, I didn't think it would. Yeah, I said. I'm a med student, so I'm very interested in hospitals in general. It was a lame explanation, but it was the best I could come up with. He said, staring at me now, the pleased grin long gone. It was obvious he thought I was bullshitting him. Hey, how about you chug that drink and we get going? He kept staring at me, daring me to refuse his suggestion. Sure, I said, and smiled at him while grabbing the drink, but instead of bringing it to my lips, I tossed the almost full martini glass into his face. It was a surefire trick I'd tried before. Ark, he snarled as some of the pink liquid found his eyes, surely burning them like hell. Throwing the glass away, I shot to my feet and ran toward the exit. By the time Hutchkins was able to see again, I should be out of the club and in a cab on my way home. I found the stairs and started climbing them. But before I could get far, someone grabbed me by the arm. What's the hurry? Sugar Pie, a gravelly voice wanted to know. Breathing hard, I turned to see who had stopped me. A bearded man in a fedora was gazing at me under the brim of his hat. Let go of me, I hissed, trying to shake myself loose from his strong grip. All that resulted in was his fingers closing tighter around my arm. What the hell is he doing? I threw a glance over my shoulder and saw that Hutchkins had recovered and was looking around the room, searching for me. The stairs were as well lit as the strippers' stages, so it was only a matter of time before he spotted me. Swallowing the big clump that had suddenly materialized in my throat, I looked down at Fedora Man's hand. I think you should stay with me, he said, and began pulling me down the stairs. I was strong, but he was much bigger than me. Soon I was moving back down into the club. My heart pumping like a jackhammer in my chest, I looked in the direction of Hutchkins again. Fuck! He had spotted me and was coming toward me and my captor, who had managed to get me all the way back down by now. I was loath to make a scene, but at this point I had no choice. With a well-aimed kick, the sharp point of my black boot slammed into Fedora Man's crotch. Folding over and gasping, he let go of me at last. Throwing another look behind me, I saw that Hutchkins was only yards away from me, fury written all over his face. I swiveled around and dashed back up the stairs. I couldn't afford another hold-up, or Hutchkins would get his hands on me. As mad as he looked, it wasn't something I wanted to deal with. Especially since Fedora Man would surely join him before I could get away. I could always pull the gun I had in my little purse, but if I did that, I might blow my cover. Those bouncers upstairs must have guns of their own, and were surely trained to disarm people. I'd have no choice but to surrender. You fucking bitch, Hutchkins snarled behind me as I ran as fast as I could up the stairs, my lungs burning. On my way, I bumped into people walking downward. Hey, watch it, an annoyed man yelled, but I was too frenzied to care. As I was near the top, a big cluster of men came toward me. Oh God, how would I get by them? As I had feared, they didn't part from me as we met, but just looked at me like I was crazy, forcing me to stop. I swiveled my head around and saw Hutchkins only a few yards behind me. He would reach me in a matter of seconds. Frantically, I looked at the two men right in front of me. There's a man with a machine gun down there. Turn around and get the hell out of here or you'll die. 5 people are already dead. What the first man said. I jabbed a finger toward the club below and yelled at the top of my lungs, "Get the hell out of here. A man with a machine gun is killing people down there." Finally, the group scattered and I could get through. Pushing myself forth, I disappeared between the men, just out of reach of Hutchkins. I could hear him snarl something behind me. I got beyond the last man and was close to the exit. I swept aside the curtains that hid the entrance and dashed outside, almost knocking my head against the chin of a famous basketball player. He grabbed my shoulders to steady me, but I shook myself loose and continued past him and his friend. I ran up the street. away from flash dancers. "Stop that woman," Hutchins yelled behind me. I moved my legs faster, praying that no one on the street where people walked would do what he wanted. I was lucky all they did was step aside, giving me room to get away. The road was full of cars, many of them cabs. I raised an arm and waved violently for one to stop for me. My luck had returned completely because one slid up to me and I dove inside. Closing the door, I locked it and told the cabbie to drive me to 70th and Broadway, using as calm a voice as I could muster. He pulled back into the busy street, and we were on our way. Leaning back into the seat, I allowed myself to catch my breath for a few moments before I turned my head to see where Hutchins was. He was standing at the side of the road next to Fedora Man, both of them shaking their fists at my cab. I couldn't stop myself from smiling a little as the adrenaline that pumped through my veins started to subside. That had been one close call. I found my phone in my purse that I had miraculously managed to bring with me in the midst of my escape and dialed George. I needed him to check if there was any truth to what Hutchins had told me about his whereabouts this past Thursday. Given his violent reaction, I remained sure he'd lied and was Ariel's murderer. Of course, that meant my gut had been totally off in thinking Janine had been involved, or maybe they had done it together somehow. Unlikely, but still possible. I held the phone close to my ear as I listened to ring after ring going through without George picking up. It finally went to voicemail. When the beep sounded, I left a message, telling him to call me back ASAP. The cab stopped on my street 15 minutes later. I paid the fare and exited, heading to my apartment building. By the time I had taken a shower and removed the heavy makeup from my face, George had still not called. I was on pins and needles, waiting for him to get back to me. Not until I had verified that Hutchins had lied about taking his mother to the hospital would I be able to relax. After having paced my apartment for a few minutes, willing my phone to ring, I sat in front of my laptop and began Googling Charles Hutchins. Maybe I could come up with some answers about him myself. For example, if I could determine that his mother was already dead, I'd know he'd lied, but without access to his social security number that had allowed George to dig up all the information he'd given me, I came up with nothing useful. I pondered calling Ian to ask him to do some digging. Surely he'd easily find out the status of George's parents at least, whether they were still alive or not. But before I could call him, I remembered that he was convinced the conspiracy was behind Ariel's murder. The last thing I felt like doing was arguing about that with him, so I put the phone back down. I popped a couple sleeping pills instead and went to bed, leaving my phone on my nightstand. When George called, I'd wake up and ask him to check Hutchins for me. George did call 3 in the morning. "Hello," I answered groggily, half asleep still. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to wake you. I thought it was urgent from your message. I'll call you back tomorrow." I sat up in bed. No, I want to talk now. I rubbed my eyes to wake myself further. I spoke to Charles Hutchins tonight. He claims he was in Philly the night of Ariel's murder because his mother had twisted her ankle and needed to go to the ER for x-rays. I think he's full of it. Can you check if his mother's even alive? Sure, I just need to go to my computer. Hang on. I lay back on my pillow and had almost fallen back asleep when George was back on the line again. His mother is not only alive still, but she lives in Philadelphia. I was suddenly wide awake. You're sure? Yeah. Unless she died in the last few days and the national registration hasn't been updated yet. Do you know what hospital they went to? Yeah, he claimed they went to Pennsylvania Hospital. Okay, I'm going to check his credit card statements again. Hold on, there was a long pause. Then George said, "Bingo." "Bingo what?" "There is a charge of $750 to the Pennsylvania Hospital on Friday. My guess is the charge was made the day before or early Friday morning. So it seems your man's telling the truth." "Really?" Wow. I could have sworn this guy had killed Ariel. How about I give you his mother's name and you can talk to her yourself to verify he was with her the entire night? Yeah, maybe he just dropped her off and then went back to New York. He could have paid the hospital bill over the phone. What's her name, address, and phone number? George gave it to me, and then we hung up. By the time I had fallen asleep again, the birds outside my window had begun to sing, and it was almost time to wake up.